Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Ryker, we're about to do our Celtics-Raptors breakdown. Obviously, we didn't put this out earlier because of everything that's happened around the NBA. We wanted to sort of make our video after everything was sort of settled. Obviously, the past few days, the league has been on protest. Started with the Milwaukee Bucks because of the really attempted murder of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And yeah, there was talks about the Toronto Raptors players, particularly Fred and Norman Powell, wanting to boycott some of the games. The Milwaukee Bucks ended up surprising the NBA and the Orlando Magic team who were on the court by protesting those games. None of the games happened on Wednesday. Obviously, they're canceled for tonight. And yeah, before we dive into this podcast, because we do have an exciting series, it's an absolute tragedy what's happening in the United States. And you know, we both you and I, we support the NBA players, the Raptors, all the teams, the Milwaukee Bucks for protesting these series and hope to see real change and hope the owners and different teams can really use their leverage, particularly the people in power, to make real change in the United States. And
yeah,
Canada.
Well, the message, absolutely. And the message is that having just the slogans on the court and basically everything that they've done up to this point, it's not effective enough. If after months of protests and basically really speaking out about this issue, this exact same thing is still happening. So I think it's pretty powerful that they took this initiative and that all of the leagues are following suit, and hopefully there can be some more significant change come from it, which is long since overdue.
Yeah, hopefully, and obviously we're not sure what the surefire plan going forward is. We expect the games to come back this weekend, Saturday. I'm not sure if there's more updated news, but you and I aren't the most experts on this topic. Clearly, we're a basketball podcast, but it's as a human being, you know the difference between right and wrong, and the fact that people are getting shot, police are just acting completely unprofessionally, unsuited for their jobs, and then people are going around shooting people in these areas, like that 17-year-old going around Kenosha. It's a tragedy.
Yeah, and I think there's a big sort of political undertone too that is polarizing in the United States, and it's not to say that these issues don't exist in Canada. Obviously, there's issues that we have to work on as well, but I think it is important with their election coming up that people do take it seriously, and there is maybe an opportunity to get that change started a little bit earlier rather than later. But it's an issue that affects not just their country, but our country and around the world. It's a topic that's being looked at pretty heavily now, and like I said, it's long overdue, and certainly you're right. It's the human side. You don't need to be a politician. You don't need to be a professional athlete to speak out about it. Any opportunity that you can to make a difference, I think that's what's important right now.
Yeah, for sure. If you're on right wing, left wing, it's just about being a human right now. So support's all out for there. But Ryker, I guess we'll dive three minutes into this pod. We'll dive into the Toronto Raptors Boston Celtics series, because this has been probably one of the most anticipated series in Raptor. We've wanted to play the Celtics really the past 4 or 5 years, and it's happening now this season, Ryker.
Ben, Stephen A. Smith was talking about there's no real, actually it was Max Kellerman, was talking about he believes there's no real rivalries right now in the NBA. He was looking at Donovan Mitchell, Jamal Murray. Stephen A. Smith was looking at LeBron, Kawhi. But I think any Raptors fan would agree that over the past couple seasons, there is no bigger rivalry than the Boston Celtics and the Toronto Raptors. And we I don't want to say we took for granted. It was pretty obvious that the series was the Raptors to win in the Brooklyn Nets Toronto Raptors first round. But this one, the Boston Celtics are not going to be undervaluated. They deserve all the credit they've got. They got a bona fide superstar in Jason Tatum. This will be a very fun, exciting, gritty series, Ben.
Yeah, for sure. And let's just dive straight into it, Ryker, because most of the people that listen to this podcast are Toronto Raptors fans, I assume, and we know how our roster's looking. But the Boston Celtics have a three-headed dragon, so to speak, especially with Gordon Hayward out, of Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, as you mentioned, Jason Tatum, and those are three guys averaging over 20 points per game, high volume scorers, can all knock down the three, dribble a little bit, slash. Obviously Tatum and Brown being the taller, bigger wings, and Kemba being that guy that can really just break you down off the dribble and hit some pull-ups, whether in the mid-range or the three-point shot. Those are the three guys that the Toronto Raptors are really going to have to worry about in this series.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because when have the Raptors really been challenged by guard play? If you look at last season's playoff run, of course, face the Orlando Magic, say what you want about that series. You face
Game 1 DJ Augustine, bro.
Yeah, well, listen. And they pulled it off again this year. All credit to them. They like those game ones. They show up for the game ones. But 76ers, it's more about the bigs. Obviously, Ben Simmons, he does what he does, but he's not being guarded by Kyle Lowry. He's a big man, basically, with ball handling skills. And then the Milwaukee Bucks, all of the focus and the attention is on Giannis. And then you get to the finals against an amazing team, maybe the best team of all time in the Golden State Warriors, but Steph Curry, you're running him, you're chasing him around off-ball screens, off-ball, you're trying to run him off the line. He's an incredible ball handler, but you're so worried about that shot. Same thing with Klay Thompson. This series will be completely different where Kemba can shoot the three, but he's not living outside the line, and same thing for all of the guards. They like to attack, so this will be different. It'll be a different kind of defensive battle.
Yeah, this is the first series I think we've really gone against a team with three real dominant ball handlers that can slash, shoot. Obviously, we saw it for about 3 minutes in the Warriors series when Kevin Durant was on the court, but obviously they only had Curry and Klay in that series for most of it, so that's not to take away anything from that team because they still had about 4 Hall of Famers on the floor and we still beat them. So, but that's enough of that. There's no asterisks behind last year's title, even though people throw that out there. But it's going to be interesting because we have the sort of wing defenders to really guard these players. And who do you think will be matched up on these guys? Because if I were to guess, I think you have to throw OG, who's in my opinion our best on-ball defender, on Jason Tatum to really get in his airspace and get him crowded and annoyed. And then we have guys like Kemba and Brown. Would you want to see us go smaller on those guys? Because Brown is definitely the least skilled ball handler out of those players. So maybe you want to pest to get up into him, make him uncomfortable, even though he is an improved ball handler, but not the slasher the other guys are in terms of ball control. And then maybe Lowry on Kemba, or would you want to see us go big, maybe a Siakam or OG on Brown, and then Fred VanVleet, who's been probably our best on-ball defender in terms of guarding point guards and stuff this season on Kemba?
Well, first, I think we can both agree that the Raptors are going to go small this series because Gasol, he's not a scorer. He just doesn't seem willing to commit to scoring in the paint. And Daniel Tice, he did a good job, I would say. I would argue he really tried to handle Joel Embiid. I think he was handsy. He wasn't trying to block shots. He knew that he was undersized for that, but he held his ground. Mm-hmm. Right, so not taking anything away from his defense, but Gasol should be able to score on him, but I think we both know that's not in the books. So if Gasol's not out there scoring, and the Boston Celtics, they play small, they run a lot of screens and switches, then you're probably going to play Ibaka for the majority of this series. So we know that it's going small, and I think that they run a lot of high screens. That's from what I've watched the Boston Celtics do so far. They run a lot of high screens. So I think you can put Kyle Lowry, you can put Fred VanVleet on. I would say Fred VanVleet is probably the better on-ball defender. So maybe he'd match up better against Kemba Walker. But either way, it's gonna be a 5-man commitment because there's gonna be so many switches off of those off those high screens.
That's an interesting take. I definitely agree with you with the Gasol. I think Gasol matches up really well if the Celtics end up playing Enes Kanter at all, right? Because Enes Kanter is only really in the league to be a low post scorer, because on the defensive end, he's just a complete liability in the pick and roll. And obviously Marc Gasol's best asset, particularly in the playoffs, is his ability to defend the rim and guard these bigger players. So I think if Enes Kanter's in the game, we've seen Ibaka and guys like Boucher struggle against Kanter over his just entire career as a Celtic, wherever he's really been. So I think Gasol can really shut down a guy like Cantor and make him completely redundant for the Boston Celtics, but I completely agree with you on that point. But you're saying we're going small. Does Ibaka include in your sort of definition of a small ball lineup? Because we've seen Ibaka really have some monster games against the Boston Celtics over the past 2 seasons, really, and he can score in the paint. I think a guy like Daniel Tice, yes, he's gritty, but Ibaka can really take that guy to school, especially if the defenders are worried about Siakam and other players like they usually do in the playoffs. And we saw Ibaka have a monster series. He's in a complete rhythm right now after playing the Brooklyn Nets. In my opinion, I think maybe going big with Ibaka there, running the center, playing a bit more inside, that could be the best sort of look for the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah, I'm considering Ibaka at the 5 being a small lineup compared to having Marc Gasol in at the 5. But it's an interesting point because Cantor obviously comes off of the bench. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to match up minutes with Gasol and Cantor, then that means you would have to shift Ibaka up into the starting lineup. And we know on the starting lineup, the scoring, like the rankings or the number that it's going to come through, it's going to be Ibaka and Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry being the 1, 2, 3 option, and Ibaka probably falling to that 4th option.
You mean Siakam? Siakam, the number 1 option.
Yeah, sorry, Siakam. Yeah. Siakam. Yeah,
Ibaka, the number 1 scoring option.
Well, listen, he's played like it, Ben. He's played like it.
True.
And my whole point is he has played like it. That's not who I meant to say. But my point was going to come back to he's been a 15 to 20 point per game guy. And I think a lot of that is because we rely on his scoring off the bench, him and Norman Powell. Mm-hmm. Would he be as effective as a scorer? Because he's probably not going to be looked to as that if he comes off the starting lineup to match up with Tice and to allow Gasol to match up against Cantor. I don't know, Ben. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've really only seen the Raptors run a 7. We might see an 8th guy, particularly Terrence Davis, get minutes, especially in a series that matters. We barely saw Nick go past the 7th man in a series against the Brooklyn Nets, so that will tell you where his mind is at sort of with this coaching dilemma of who to bring in. So I think we're going to see a lot of Ibaka with the starters regardless of if he's off the bench or starting. And, you know, the only real worry I have with the Toronto Raptors in this series, because I think we're the best suited team in the NBA to really defend the Boston Celtics. I think we have a lot of mobile wing defenders that can crowd their airspace, make it really tough on guys like Brown and Tatum to get open threes and slash the rim. I think we're going to force them into a lot of long twos, and I think defensively we're pretty set to go up against the Boston Celtics, even though we did have that one game in the bubble where we ran this weird high 3-2 zone and let them score every time, but that was a weird look. We'll see if that continues into the playoffs, but I think defensively we're fine. Our only real worries is sometimes this season, particularly when Siakam is struggling, and as well as Fred, we go through these offensive droughts, and you don't really know where the buckets are going to come from, and I think Ibaka could be a real antidote to that issue. And whether he's playing with the starters or not, I think getting easy buckets against the Boston Celtics is going to be essential, especially where they have such good wing defenders and guard defenders-ish. Kemba's not a great defender, but Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Tatum, those are solid guys that can guard around the perimeter.
Ben, I was going to say the exact same thing, literally the exact same thing, because the Philadelphia 76ers, without Ben Simmons, they're not good. They're really not. And
especially
Embiid, he was getting, this year they were getting double-teamed. I think Tobias Harris and what's his name, Al Horford, they combined for, were you telling me this? They combined for as many threes as Markelle Fultz or they hit less?
Markelle Fultz has hit like double the threes 2 of those guys hit in their series. So that'll tell you.
Yeah, so they've been awful. That whole team, and they kept up with the Boston Celtics. Now, I don't know if the Raptors would have swept the 76ers, but it wouldn't have been a contest. And the simple point is, the Boston Celtics, they handle them 4 games. You can't read too much into it. But some of those games were pretty close. At least 2 of them, it was kind of down to the wire. So I'd agree. If the 76ers can keep up, the Raptors being a much superior defensive team, they should also be fine. But the offense, that's definitely where the issue can lie. And Siakam typically does seem to struggle against the Celtics. And Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry, if he's playing bad, they usually bring the team back together by splashing threes, which may be eliminated to an extent because of the ability for guys like Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown, and they do have terrific wing defenders. I'm looking at Serge Ibaka just like you, getting those inside shots. I'm also looking at Norman Powell to be a slasher this game or in this series.
Yeah. Norman Powell is going to be essential because if you look at our usual starting lineup, whether it's Ibaka or Gasol at center, we have Fred, Lowry, and OG out there, and Siakam obviously with whatever center we decide to run with, and everyone's going to match up with whoever. But I expect them to run sort of a big lineup. The big wings probably are our offensive threats like Lowry and Fred, just like the Sixers did last year in the second round. And the Fred and Lowry really struggled with that last season. Now, Lowry's obviously more of a scoring option this year and has been shooting the ball a bit better. Fred VanVleet looks like a totally different scorer and dribbler and all that sort of stuff this season. So I expect them to handle longer wing defenders better. And then, some people are saying that Marcus Smart might end up on Siakam because he's tended to guard a lot of posts and during these times, but maybe we'll see Smart on one of the smaller wings. But that's an analysis that I've heard people talk about specifically on Celtics Reddit broken down. So maybe they'll run something weird like that to get the Raptors out of their rhythm. We know Nick Nurse and Brad Stevens love to try different things, but I think regardless of the matchup, I think they're going to test out OG Anunoby to see if he can really put the ball on the floor and score, be a scoring option for this Toronto Raptors team. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have Kemba Walker on him to start. And I think OG is a real key in this series. He needs to be able to take a guy like Kemba off the dribble, bully him right to the rim. And do you think he's capable of doing that? Obviously, during the bubble, his handle was looking tight. Didn't look that great in terms of a scoring option against the Brooklyn Nets, but we didn't really need our third and fourth and fifth option on the courts to get going because our main options, Fred and Siakam, were cooking most of the series. So do you think OG is capable of surprising the Celtics if they don't try to guard him, as they load up on our main guys?
Yeah, well, you would definitely, if you're the Boston Celtics, you're treating him as the weakest link on the offensive end for the Toronto Raptors. Mm-hmm. And they've shown as well, you talk about maybe putting Marcus Smart on Siakam, that even if they put Siakam into a post-up situation, Celtics have shown that they're very comfortable with sending an early double team down because they're confident in their ability, their rotation defense to come out and and help out on perimeter shooters. So that's something that they could neutralize this game potentially, but that obviously leaves guys open. And OG, he might be that guy. The only thing that I would say is I could see him definitely taking advantage for a game. Maybe he has a big 16-point game. He has a big 20-point game if we're being, a little bit overconfident here. But I don't see him consistently being anything more than 10 to 12 point per game guy in this series just because he's never been that guy to date. And against – sorry?
In that Wizards series, that Cavs series in his rookie year, he showed out in the playoffs. He was amping up his games in those series. I know we got swept by the Cavs, but he was the one bright light in that year. Obviously, he didn't show a lot in the first round series, played great defense against the Nets, and couldn't play at all the playoffs last year. But he has shown out a little bit, particularly in that Wizards series, where he stepped up his offense when they started sagging off him a little bit because the defense completely changes in the playoffs. And I think he can go big, Riker, with Kemba Walker as his main matchup.
He could. But if you're talking about X factors, I'm looking at Marc Gasol, and I hate to even bring him up because I know it's just wishing on a star here. But Ben, the reason that the 76ers could not even scrape a game off of the Boston Celtics is because there was nobody that could hit a shot when they double-teamed Embiid. They had plenty of threes, but they were just garbage from the perimeter. And then they got a lot of late shot clock situations where they had Shake Milton trying to create, and he's just he's a spot-up shooter, And so if you look at the Toronto Raptors, if they could at least have a Gasol being somewhat of a viable threat down in the post to score every once in a while, they don't have the size to match up with him. They're going to double him the same way that they doubled Embiid by being confident that they can do that, but the Raptors being the far superior three-point shooting team and able to score in a late shot clock situation, I think that would be the key to the series, Ben. And then you can have OG on the corner there, knocking down those shots, taking advantage of Kemba Walker, all that. But unfortunately, I don't know if Gasol is that guy, and I don't know if OG is a 15-point per game player either. So I don't know.
Those are the two big question marks for the Raptors going into the series, and The one positive thing about it is I think both you and I, particularly in the playoffs, we trust that Ibaka and Norm will be able to score against this Boston Celtics team. So even if the main players in our starting lineup aren't able to get it going, I think we do have a lineup with Fred, Lowry, Norm, Ibaka, and Pascal. It's sort of out of order, but those 5 guys, I think all of those players can defend and put the ball in the bucket. So if we do have those 2 guys struggle, it'll be fine for the Toronto Raptors on the offensive end. I do want to dive into a couple of the role players on the Celtics, though, Riker, because we talked about the Raptors role guys, and maybe we'll bring up TD a little bit more at the end of this one, but are there any guys outside of the Celtics' big 3 that really you fare on offense? Because Marcus Smart, he's really struggled from 3 in the playoffs, but he's amped up his 3-point shooting a bit this season, so we'll see if that continues, but not just this playoffs. In past years, he usually struggles. He'll have one big game, one fiery night from the Celtics series I've watched, and then would just be dropping duds for a lot of the rest of the games. Tice can kind of shoot from 3, shoots 33% on the year on 1 attempt per game. Off the bench, they have Wanamaker, Cantor, Grant Williams, who played really well against us in the bubble, or was it Robert Williams, their center, whichever one is the athletic center, and Semi Ojeleye, who's just a complete monster, man. He's jacked as anything. So any of those guys really scare you off the Celtics bench or outside of their big 3?
No, because you talk about the 3-headed monster of the Boston Celtics. You look at their minutes, they're running them all about 40 minutes per game. They play an even tighter rotation than the Toronto Raptors have been playing when we're looking at maybe tightening into a 7-man rotation. It looks like they'd almost want to play a 5-man or a 6-man if they could.
3-man.
So, yeah, exactly. The only thing that scares me is if, the role players start, we collapse on the bigger guys and then the role players start knocking down threes, or those they're my least favorite plays in the game when the Boston Celtics really get rolling and then they start throwing backdoor alley-oops to guys that just have no business scoring, right? To the Grant Williams or the Enes Kantors of the team.
Robert Williams is the center. Just validated that.
He is the athletic center, but Grant Williams gets more play than Robert Williams does.
Yep.
So, yeah, but you know exactly what I'm talking about when they get those kind of cheesy or transition alley-oops, whatever, like the Boston Celtics. But I'm not worried about them. The Raptors, obviously, much better depth, and that'd be arguable if you bring it to the overall league to say who has more depth, the Raptors or the Celtics. And I'm sure people love the Celtics, but I don't think there's any debate that the scoring ability off the bench for the Raptors is tenfold better than the Boston Celtics. But Ben, and I you know what? I completely forgot my question that I was about to ask you, so I'm just going to bring it back to you, and then when I remember it, I'm going to ask it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Enes Kanter, he's had some big games against us this year, particularly when Ibaka in there is guarding him. So I think Gasol on Kanter is going to be essential. And when he's on the court, you have to attack him in pick and rolls and make him sort of switch on to players, whether it's a pick and roll or not, because he's really tough on defense for basically every team he's been on in his entire career. So that's a guy you have to attack. Robert Williams kind of scared me in that bubble game, just with his energy and athleticism. Apparently, he's really inconsistent from a lot of the Celtics fans I've talked to. Langford, these guys, they don't have the depth that we have. They don't have those sort types of players. Brad Wanamaker can kind of shoot threes, but he's not a real offensive threat that you look to worry about. But I don't know. They're an interesting team, the Boston Celtics, and they arguably, I think, specifically in the second half of the season, Tatum has been outperforming Siakam because of Siakam's inconsistencies, but I guess we could make a whole video on the specific matchups because there's a bunch of huge debates regarding Siakam and Tatum, Nurse and Stevens, and Kemba and Kyle. Those ones have been talked about seemingly the whole sort of year on Twitter and Reddit, so we can maybe make a whole second breakdown podcast talking about those types of matchups. Do you want to speak briefly onto those guys before we dive into our predictions?
No, I do want to ask you, I remember my question, one last question before we sound off on the predictions and end the video, is the Raptors, they like to sometimes get blown out in the playoffs. One game, and it kind of shakes them into their senses. They love to lose one big time to rally into a win. But Ben, They just lost big time to the Boston Celtics. Is that enough that we can see some consistency in the series, whether or not it's close wins or losses or dominating performances? Are we going to see the Raptors come out and get absolutely smacked around like we just saw a couple of games ago?
No, I don't expect that. Even though last year we have seen some of those games, even with Kawhi against the Bucks and the Sixers. I think this team's a different team. This team is a bit more us against the world. You know, there's a lot of pride on the line for the Raptors. Obviously, we did take that blowout loss, but the Raptors have won 15 of their last 16 games. You're gonna have a lot of those. You're gonna have one or two of those duds in the mix of a lot of good basketball. So that's just how it is. I think the playoffs were focused. We might see them rest some guys, especially where the games are back to back and stuff. You know, Lowry, we're assuming he's coming back. He gets a couple of extra days rest now. The game isn't today, and I believe it will happen Saturday or Sunday. So it's we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I'm not ruling it out. I see where you're coming from. Do you think what will happen? Because I don't know. It's tough.
I don't know. The thing is, the Celtics just don't have the size. And I know the Raptors can play small, and you look at our backcourt, and of course we have a very small backcourt, but the Boston Celtics, they're kind of an enigma to me in how good they are at defense. Like, Demi Siakam should be able to score every time. Gasol should be able to score every time. But I could see the Raptors losing one in a spectacular fashion, but I still have the series going in favor of the Raptors.
Yeah, I do as well. What's your take? What's your prediction, Riker?
My prediction is Raptors in 6. I don't see the Celtics taking 3 games off the Toronto Raptors.
I am in complete agreement with you, sir. Maybe it'll be like the Bucks series last year where we both pick Raps in 6, we lose the first 2, and then sweep the rest of the games, because that's the last time that we agreed on a series in 6. But who knows what will happen? Let's know what you guys think. Obviously, this podcast went along, but it's an interesting topic, and we had an important intro to talk about. So real exciting to get this series actually happening. You're the best to make this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. You have any last words, Riker?
That's it, Ben. Getting her going.
Getting her going.
Cheers.